She was given a business card. She owned the company. 51 minutes. That's all the time Emily had left when Bradley slid the business card across the mahogany table like a joke he was still enjoying. She sat with her hands folded, wearing the same gray blazer she'd worn to visit their grandfather every Sunday for 4 years, the blazer nobody in this room had ever noticed. "Everyone else got portfolios," Bradley said, loud enough for all 6 board members to hear. "You got a name and a phone number. I'd frame it if I were you. Sentimental value." A cousin near the window laughed softly. Someone else studied their coffee cup with sudden interest. 20 seconds of silence, and not one person at that table looked at Emily. She didn't touch the card. She didn't raise her voice. She looked at it the way you look at something you've carried, folded and unopened, in your jacket pocket for 11 months. Because in 51 minutes, a filing deadline nobody else in this room knew existed would close, and it would decide, permanently, who actually owned the chair Bradley was sitting in. He just didn't know it yet. 9 months earlier, Emily sits in a converted garage apartment above her landlord's detached garage in Hartford, the space barely large enough for a twin bed and a desk built from 2 filing cabinets and a door. The radiator clanks every 40 minutes. The smell of her neighbor's cooking drifts under the door most evenings. Garlic, always garlic. Rent was $675 a month, 3 months behind. Her old Honda Civic had 187,000 miles on it, and a check engine light she'd learned to ignore. Groceries were $40 a week, stretched by a spreadsheet she updated every Sunday. Her mother's hospital copay that month was $310, a number Emily had memorized without meaning to. When her mother texted asking if she could help cover it, Emily didn't hesitate. She transferred the $310 she didn't have and ate rice for 6 days. What no one in the family knew was that for 3 years, Emily had been quietly meeting her grandfather every Sunday, not for money, not for business, but because after her grandmother died, he'd stop eating properly and stop answering calls from everyone except her. Over 81 Sundays, she learned things about Carter Holdings. No cousin, no board member, not even Bradley had ever asked about who the company actually served, which employees had been with the family for decades, which promises had quietly been broken along the way. She never asked her grandfather for a dime. She asked him about Walter, the security guard who'd worked the gate for 34 years. She asked him why the company still hadn't paid out the pension increase promised back in 2019. The call came at 6:47 in the morning, 3 weeks before the reading of the will. It was the family attorney, informing her that her grandfather had passed peacefully in his sleep. Emily didn't cry in front of anyone. She drove to the funeral home herself instead of waiting for Bradley to organize transportation, because she needed to see the paperwork before anyone else touched it. She didn't celebrate anything. There was nothing yet to celebrate. 3 clocks were already ticking, though no one else knew it. First, the corporate filing deadline for confirming controlling ownership of Carter Holdings, which had to be submitted within 90 days of probate closing. Miss it, and the board could legally challenge the transfer for another 5 years. Second, a local news segment on the next generation of Carter Realty, scheduled for the evening of the will reading, meant to introduce Bradley as CEO to investors watching. Third, and quietest of all, her grandmother's 40th anniversary at Millbrook Senior Residence, the one promise Emily had made to her grandmother that had nothing to do with money at all. The math of that day was simple and brutal. She had less than 12 hours to become the person the paperwork already said she was. I was 9 years old. It was a Tuesday in October, and my mother had just come off a double shift at Millbrook General. Her scrubs still smelled like antiseptic, and the inside of her car, which never fully warmed up before winter ended. She picked me up from school 40 minutes late, and I remember being embarrassed, watching the other kids get into cars that didn't rattle at stoplights. That evening at a hospital fundraiser, she'd been asked to help staff one of the board members' wives. A woman in a coat that cost more than my mother made in a month asked her in front of everyone which nursing school she'd managed to get into. Not where she went. Managed to get into. The room went quiet in that particular way. Rooms go quiet when everyone heard something ugly and no one wants to be the one to name it. My mother didn't raise her voice. She didn't explain her credentials, though she had every right to. She simply said, Roseland Community College. Then 11 years on this floor, and she walked back to work. I asked her in the car why she didn't say more. She was quiet for a long time before she answered. Emily, some people need you to argue with them so they can feel like they won something. Don't give them the fight. Just be so good at what you do that the argument becomes pointless. That lesson didn't leave her, and it never left me. It became the architecture of everything I built after, every quiet Sunday with grandfather, every question I asked about Walter's pension instead of my own inheritance, every moment I chose to be useful instead of loud. Today would be the day that lesson got tested at a scale my mother never could have imagined. It was 22 minutes past 4. 38 minutes remained until the filing deadline. Margaret Doyle stood near the door of the boardroom, clipboard pressed to her chest, watching Emily with an expression that flickered between guilt and something close to fear. She had managed the Carter family's estate for 22 years. She knew exactly what was in the sealed envelope sitting in her desk drawer downstairs. She had known for 3 months. "Ms. Doyle," Bradley said, not looking up from his folder, "confirm for the board that the standard succession documents were properly executed." "They were," Margaret said carefully. Her eyes moved once, briefly, to Emily, then away. Bradley leaned back. "Then I don't understand the confusion." Emily received exactly what grandfather's estate attorney classified as appropriate. He said the word appropriate the way people say words they've rehearsed. There's a clause, a fairly standard one actually, regarding beneficiaries who haven't demonstrated sufficient involvement in the business. What does sufficient involvement mean exactly when the person measuring it never once asked what involvement looked like? Nobody in the room challenged him. It was easier not to. It was 31 minutes past 4. 29 minutes remained. Emily finally spoke. "Can you read me the exact clause, Bradley, word for word?" He hesitated, just slightly, just long enough for Emily to notice. It's paraphrased, standard language. "So there's no clause," Emily said. "Not a question. A note being taken?" A junior board member glanced at his laptop screen, then quickly minimized a window. Emily saw it. She said nothing. She was still collecting. At the far end of the hallway outside the boardroom, Walter Higgins stood with his security jacket buttoned wrong, one button off from the top, the way it got when his hands ached in the cold. 71 years old, 34 years on this property, he was asking the front desk coordinator, quietly, politely, about the pension increase promised to him in writing back in 2019. "I'm not trying to make trouble," Walter said. "I just need to know if it's coming before I retire in March. My daughter's helping with the mortgage and I don't want to leave her with a shortfall." "I'm sorry, Mr. Higgins," the coordinator said, glancing nervously toward the boardroom. "There's a new verification requirement for legacy pension adjustments. Non-standard classification. It needs board approval, and with the transition happening today, I really can't." Bradley, passing through the hallway on his way to refill his coffee, heard the exchange. He said nothing. He kept walking. Emily, standing near the boardroom doorway, saw all of it. It was 38 minutes past 4. 22 minutes remained. In her head, the math ran cold and fast. 22 minutes to the filing deadline, 2 hours to the television interview that would introduce Bradley as CEO to every investor watching, 3.5 hours to her grandmother's anniversary, the one promise she could not break twice in one lifetime. 8 months of quiet, careful preparation, every Sunday, every signature the attorney had walked her through, every ounce of trust her grandfather had spent a decade building, all of it sitting inside a single folder in her bag. Is walking toward Walter right now an act of conscience, or an act of self-sabotage? She looked down at her phone. 3 messages waiting, unread. She looked up at Walter's face, an old man doing math about his daughter's mortgage in a hallway nobody important was supposed to notice. She walked toward him. She didn't explain why. She just walked. Margaret, watching from the boardroom doorway, opened her mouth as though she might finally say something, then closed it. Some silences take 22 years to end. This one, not yet. It was 41 minutes past 4. 19 minutes remained. "Walter," Emily said, "what's the exact number they promised you in 2019? Bradley reappeared in the hallway, coffee in hand, expression sharpening. "Emily, this isn't the time." "An 11% increase," Walter said. "Signed by your grandfather himself. I have the letter at home." "Emily," Bradley said again, louder now, aware that 2 employees near the elevator had stopped to watch. "We have a board waiting. This is a personnel matter." a woman near the elevator quietly raised her phone and began recording. It was 44 minutes past 4. 16 minutes remained. Bradley's voice climbed half a register, not shouting, but close. I am trying to keep this transition professional, and you are out here litigating a pension issue from 6 years ago in front of a camera phone. Margaret's hands, still holding her clipboard, had begun to tremble slightly. 3 messages landed on Emily's phone at once. From her attorney, filing window closes in 16 minutes. I need your signature scanned and sent now or we lose the 60-day window. From the news producer. Confirming the 7:30 segment still on, Bradley's team says you won't be joining. Confirm, from her grandmother. Sweetheart, don't rush on my account. I just want you there when you can. I love you. Emily didn't answer any of them. Not yet. It was 46 minutes past 4. 14 minutes remained. Bradley, phone pressed to his ear, spoke to someone in a lowered voice near the elevator, not quite low enough. She's out here making a scene with the security guard. I don't care what grandfather's lawyer said about readiness. This is exactly the problem. Emily heard every word. She didn't react. She opened her laptop. It was 49 minutes past 4. 11 minutes remained. Emily walked back into the boardroom, laptop open, and set it gently on the table facing Bradley. No dramatic gesture. No raised voice. Just a single motion, and then stillness. Read the top line, she said. Bradley looked. His jaw tightened. Carter Holdings, Emily continued, controlling ownership certificate. 51% filed and notarized 14 months ago, dated and time-stamped 3 years before grandfather's passing, signed authorization letter attached. Executed by the estate council, witnessed by 2 independent parties. The room went silent in the specific way. Rooms go silent when arithmetic replaces argument. What that means, Bradley, she said, is that the public will you all read from was never the controlling document. It distributed cash, property, and personal accounts, genuinely, fairly, to everyone in this room. It was never meant to transfer ownership of the company itself. That was decided separately years ago. She turned the laptop slightly. Second document. This is an internal audit. Grandfather commissioned 18 months before he died, not about today, about a pattern. 4 denied pension adjustments to legacy staff since 2019, each one classified under a non-standard verification clause that appears nowhere in any employee handbook. Walter Higgins is the 4th name on that list. You set this up, Bradley said, his voice cracking slightly. You planned this whole. I asked grandfather lawful questions for 3 years and followed the process his attorney laid out, Emily said evenly. The rest was choices other people made without me in the room. He just hadn't known it yet. She turned to Margaret. I need the 2019 pension file pulled and corrected by end of day, not punished, just corrected. Margaret nodded, hands still shaking, but steady enough now to move. She turned to Walter, still standing in the doorway. She opened her phone, dialed payroll directly, and in under 90 seconds authorized the increase herself, backdated to the original letter. It's done, she told him. It should have been done 6 years ago. I'm sorry it wasn't. She closed the laptop and looked at Bradley one last time. Fairness isn't just a value, Bradley. In a company like this one, it's a retention strategy, an investor confidence strategy, and eventually, a legal liability if ignored long enough. I'll show you the data whenever you're ready to look at it. It was 58 minutes past 4. 2 minutes remained. She opened her email, attached the signed filing, and sent it with 11 seconds to spare. The room didn't erupt. It just changed temperature. 2 board members exchanged a look that said more than any statement could. The woman by the elevator lowered her phone slowly, unsure now whether what she'd recorded was a scandal or something else entirely. Bradley sat down. He didn't argue further. He stared at the screen for a long moment, the way people stare at something true. They built an entire identity around not seeing. Margaret walked out with the pension file already under her arm, her hands no longer shaking, though something in her face suggested she would carry this particular 22 years for a while longer. Walter received a text confirmation of his corrected pension before he even reached the parking lot. He read it twice. He didn't say anything to anyone. He just sat in his car for a minute before starting the engine. Emily gathered her laptop, said nothing further, and walked out. In her head, there was no triumph, only the clock. She dialed as she reached her car. Grandma, I'm on my way. Margaret Doyle still works for Carter Holdings, though her title has changed. She now runs internal compliance, a department that didn't exist 3 months ago. Her first act was rewriting every legacy benefit policy from scratch, removing all undefined non-standard language from the employee handbook. She still flinches slightly whenever anyone mentions the word readiness. Some silences leave a mark long after they end. Bradley Carter remains at the company, in a reduced operational role, pending the completion of a formal governance review that took 11 weeks. Investigators found no evidence he altered any documents, only that he had, for years, benefited from a system that never required him to ask questions. He was not fired. He was required to complete the same compliance training now, mandatory for every executive. It wasn't punishment. It was, finally, the system working the way it should have from the start. Walter Higgins retired in March as planned, with his corrected pension in place, plus 11% in retroactive back pay he never expected to see. He still visits the property gate sometimes, just to say hello to the new hire he trained. The company itself changed in measurable ways. 41 legacy benefit files were audited and corrected. Employee retention rose 17% in 6 months. 3 investors who had quietly considered pulling out during the transition instead increased their positions. A regional business journal ran a feature on Carter Holdings' new governance model, and 2 competing family firms have since requested consultations on replicating it. Emily Carter doesn't run daily operations anymore. She hired a president for that. She spends most Sundays doing exactly what she used to do before any of this happened, sitting with her grandmother who finally got her anniversary celebration 3 days late. In a small dining room with bad coffee and better company than any boardroom ever offered. The gray blazer still hangs in her closet, the one nobody in that room ever noticed. She wears it every Sunday now, the same as always. Emily kept the business card. It sits in a drawer, not framed, not sentimental, just a reminder of the day everyone in the room decided what she was worth without asking her a single question. Something good happened in that boardroom. A pension got corrected. A pattern got named. A young woman who was handed a business card as a joke ended up holding the paperwork that mattered most. That part is real, and it's worth sitting with. But it's worth being honest about the rest, too. Emily won because she had something most people in her position never will: a grandfather, with the resources to build a legal structure most families can't imagine. And 3 years of Sundays most people can't afford to give up when they're already working 2 jobs. She won because the paperwork existed. What about the people in rooms just like that one every day, who have the same quiet dignity and none of the documentation to back it up? How many Walters are still waiting on a pension letter nobody's going to correct? How many Margarets are still deciding, right now, whether 22 years of silence is worth breaking? And what does it say about the rest of us that the story we tell each other most often is the one that ends with a reveal, and not the far more common one that ends in a quiet room, with nobody walking in carrying the right laptop at the right time? Fairness shouldn't require a hidden inheritance to make it happen. It should just be how the room already works. At Revenge Files, we don't soften the emotion or dilute the message. We tell powerful, fictional stories inspired by real-world issues too many people face in silence. If today's story moved you, if it made you think, made you feel, or made you see something you couldn't unsee, hit like, share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Because the conversation doesn't end here, it's just beginning. This is a fictional story inspired by real systemic issues documented in public research on workplace pension inequity and family business succession disputes. All characters, institutions, and events are entirely invented. Any resemblance to real persons or organizations is coincidental.